الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. We wanted to review some points from the life of Uthman and Ali radiallahu anhuma. And we want to continue with the reflection on the lives of the companions with regard to what is it that we can take from their lives to clarify our thinking and our practice. So our approach is not to go 100% with every detail, given the time that we have is not a good approach. But one of the things that we need to realize, and we started off with this when we talked about Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, when we talked about how Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu was very proficient at dealing with crisis. One of the things that we need to realize is that what the Prophet ﷺ had achieved with regard to bringing about change in a short period of time and the belief of the people and the practice of the people, and he was able to accomplish something which was unprecedented, and that was he had the ability to bring people together that were warring with each other over long periods of time. The other thing is that the Prophet ﷺ, and we mentioned this last time, and there's no harm in this, is very important to understand that the Prophet ﷺ, we say, يعني أخذ بالأسباب. He dealt with cause and effect. And so we see that every stage of the da'wah, and especially when you do a real focused study of the seerah, and you begin to look into the meanings behind the seerah and how the Prophet ﷺ did certain things, you begin to see that there was plans for mostly everything. The Prophet ﷺ was extremely strategic, and one of the things that he did with regularity was he read the people really well and their needs, and he addressed the needs of the people. And you especially see this very clearly when the beginning of Hijrah began to take place. And we have to realize that Hijrah, or the migration of the Muslims from the land that they were in, that began with the Muslims going to Habasha. Most of what we hear with regard to that account or that situation, we hear that the Muslims were weak, so they migrated. And that's one understanding of seerah, but it doesn't match 100% with the historical account. It doesn't match 100% with the historical account. That the Muslims migrated, let me be clear, the Muslims migrated to Habasha because they were weak. That's the popular understanding. But the reality of the situation is that we see that some of the Muslims that were the weakest Muslims stayed behind. They didn't migrate. So some of the scholars, they say no, that the Prophet ﷺ, in that situation, he wasn't necessarily running away from that struggle. And we see that he waited to the hukm of Allah commanded him to make the migration, but they stayed there. They stayed and they confronted the challenges of the community. Some of the scholars say, well, look, what happened in Ethiopia or what happened in Africa was that the Prophet ﷺ opened up a new horizon in the da'wah. So as that was taking place, the Prophet ﷺ saw some conditions there in Habasha, and those conditions were ripe for the Muslims to be able to prosper in, the da'wah itself to be able to prosper in. That's extremely important. And we talked about being strategic in our thinking, because if we study that situation, especially the migration to Habasha, Quraysh had no diplomatic influence at a high level with the Christians of Abyssinia. So they couldn't influence them in that regard. And economically, they didn't have any hand over them. You see what I'm saying? And it was a place where there was enough justice, as they say, for the Muslims to be able to breathe. And it's important to study the way that the Sahaba themselves, radiallahu anhum, the way they did da'wah. Because when they went over there, they didn't immediately go and they started saying that you guys are mushrikun and so on and so forth. They found the common ground. Now, if we do that type of stuff today, immediately the Muslims say, well, this is the compromise point. You know, there's issues in Aqidah. No. But when they went, they explained the common ground between them and the Christians so well that the Christians themselves began to say, well, there's not too much of a difference between us, but they knew there was a difference. So it was not like what we do in interfaith stuff sometimes. It was very clear. And then what the difference was as far as Tawheed. And then later on you find that they send a delegation. The Christians themselves send a delegation to meet the Prophet ﷺ, and they look at the condition of the Muslims. Up to now, you know, we think that Ethiopia is the land of the majority of the Ethiopians are Muslim people. That goes way back. And the scholarship in Ethiopia is very strong. It's just not that we don't talk about it. It was like for a long time, you know, people didn't talk about the scholarship in Pakistan or India. You know, that took a while for people to be able to come to recognize that and respect that. Uthman radiallahu anhu, that was probably the only time that he didn't spend with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam when he was there in that region. But one of the characteristics of Uthman radiallahu anhu is that he had mulazama. He spent a lot of time with the Prophet alayhi salatu wasallam. Spent a lot of time with the Prophet. And one of the things alayhi salatu wasallam that Uthman did that is very important in our thinking overall, in our leadership thinking. Uthman, he purchased a well that was under the control of a Yahudi. And when he purchased it, he immediately opened it up for the Muslims. And so the idea of endowment that we know that Harvard is established on this, and you know, a lot of the major institutions of learning are established on this. And in fact, in the past, this is the biggest difference between the rich today or the wealthy, so to speak, today and in the past. When you look at people like Carnegie and Rockefeller and all those people like that, they had kickbacks to the society. So Northwestern University, you know, some of us know, or maybe all of us know, Northwestern University is supposed to be one of the top universities in the country, but in the Midwest. Rockefeller actually wanted to put that in Ohio, in Cleveland, Ohio, which is considered like the backyard of the East Coast. It's the gateway to, you know, from between the East Coast and the Midwest. So out there, that's where Carnegie and all those people, you know, that type of group was at. And so the families that were well-to-do, they said, no, we send our children to Harvard and Yale. We send them to the East Coast, so to speak. So he said, fine, you don't want me to spend my money? He took his money to Chicago, established Northwestern. And the reason why I bring that up is because look at the thinking. The wealthy, when they gained a certain amount of money, they did things with their money. And it benefited the society. Even if they were abusive of the workers and all that. We know the situation with Rockefeller and Carnegie and all that. That's the difference between now and today. Now, they have more profit and gain than countries, but they don't want to give back anything to the society which they took from. And we live in this country. You see what I'm saying? And living in this country under those conditions means we're going to be facing some difficult times. Because if you're just making wealth, in Islam we have zakat. In Islam we have sadaqah. But if you're finding 1,000 ways not to give back, see what I'm saying? That's only going to implode the society. And so the Sahaba, they had those types of ideas. We said that, you know, that began with the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and taking care of the poor. the Prophet ﷺ in making sure that the people were established. A big issue was that the Prophet ﷺ, when they migrated from Mecca, because Mecca was a place where the Muslims were being persecuted, so they had to go to a safe environment, and Allah allowed them to go to Medina. That was a chosen place for them, which has established Islam till now. And we mentioned this before. They had a housing problem. You had all those people leaving. It was a serious housing problem, employment problem. Do we think that the people were just going to sit there? This may sound wrong, but the people were just not going to ride with La ilaha illallah without any benefit in the material sense. So when you look in the seerah, you see that the Prophet ﷺ took care of them. He established them. That's where the Brotherhood Pact came in. And the Brotherhood Pact, it came in to establish the relationships between the Muslims, those who had, those that didn't have, those that migrated, those that did. We have something like that, but people, when they come to this country, where do they come to? They come to the masjid. They come to the masjid, they look to see, is anybody have a job? Is there an apartment? Because they have this understanding somewhat that the community is a friendly face. I'm going to find somebody to help. But that wasn't enough, that type of approach. The Prophet ﷺ intentionally built those relationships. Omar carried that on. Omar continued that, and he built the Muslim community, the Muslim Ummah, or some, they like to argue against this point nowadays because we're against the political now. But the Islamic State, this is like an anathema now. We're not allowed to talk about this anymore, especially after the Arab Spring. We can't talk about Islamic government. We can't talk about the Muslims having political power. Half of the Muslim community thinks you talk about politics is against the deen. There's a right way to talk about politics and a wrong way to talk about politics. There's a right way to do politics, wrong way to do politics. That's the bottom line. But the example that we're trying to bring out is we're trying to show the continuity that the Prophet ﷺ, he taught them that. Not just thinking about taking care of my family and the tribe and so on and so forth, but thinking about the well-being of the whole community. So Umar established that as well. Then Uthman carried that over. Now, there's a few things that come up in the time of Uthman, radiallahu anhu. One thing that's important to understand is we see that they're institutionalizing, they're seeing what the concerns of the Muslims are, they're networking, they're building relationships, they're thinking economy. They're not just thinking salah, but they're thinking salah, economy, how to move the people forward, how to organize the community. That was very clear in the lives of the Sahaba. One of the things that the Sahaba, the leading companions, they asked Uthman to take bay'ah on. We mentioned it last time. But this is extremely important. They asked Uthman to take bay'ah, not only on the idea of the Quran and the Sunnah, but that Uthman would respect the judgments. Judgments meaning not fatwas, but the judgments like the judiciary system of Abu Bakr and Umar. And along with that, of course, came the understanding of the Sahaba, the fatwa and so on and so forth. Why is that important? Because you have to think, you have to pause for a minute. The Sahaba, that was a contentious point for some people, especially the Shia. They take that into a contention with us as Sunnis. But because of that move, because of that demand of the Sahaba, from there we began to systematize and codify the understanding of the early generations of Quran and the Sunnah. See what I'm saying? And then from there, the madhahib built, and the Muslim knowledge with regard to the Quran and the Sunnah became more and more sophisticated. So on two fronts, on the educational front, the Muslims organized themselves. And on the political and economical front, they organized themselves. Uthman, radiallahu anhu, he was looking at the condition of the Muslims. And he began to see that they were differing among themselves with regard to the recitation of the Quran. The danger of sitting and just criticizing, because this happened, criticizing Uthman because of the decisions he made with regard to putting his family in place. The danger of that's not to say that it were not mistakes, because we don't say that the Sahaba are ma'soom. We don't say the Sahaba are infallible. But we try to understand and we try to gain insight. There's no necessity to sit there and criticize them overly, but we take benefit from their mistakes. And that's what has happened. But aside from that type of reading of the lives of the Sahaba, we have to realize that even if Uthman had mistakes on that front, on the political front, that he, at a certain point, and it wasn't at the beginning of his rule, it was mostly towards the end, that he began to select his family members and put them in power. And he has some rationale for why he did that, and the Sahaba complained and they were against him on that. Aside from that, what Uthman did, all of us have to give shukr to Allah. Because what Uthman did was Uthman took the decision which was difficult for Umar and Abu Bakr to take, and it was to make to bring the writing of the Quran into one mushaf. So the mushaf that we have in today's time in writing is because of Uthman. Uthman saw that the companions in different places, some of them, the lesser companions, they were beginning to read the Quran and become confused as to some of the qira'at, and he made sure that the writing of the Quran was systematized, was put in one place, and there was one mushaf that was standardized, because remember that writing was what? A new technology. When it came from the issue of the hifz, no problem. But the writing was something that was what? A new technology. Those people were amazing in hifz. We can't compare them with our weak memories here in the US. Even when you go overseas, what's the number one thing in education? Memorization. So Uthman's insight, it has such an impact that up to now, to this day, 1400 or say 1300 years later almost, his decision still holds weight in the ummah and it unifies the ummah. So yes, maybe on the political front, he maybe made some decisions that some didn't like, but it also gives us insight as well, with regard to him putting his family in place. The other thing is that in the time of Uthman, Khorasan, Africa, and all the way, we mentioned this last time, Al-Andalus, all of that opened up for the Muslims. See, for every stage that we see in the da'wah, new problems arose with new challenges. But the Sahaba, radiallahu anhum ajmain, one of the things that they did is that they looked, how is it that the deen can apply and how can we organize ourselves? Uthman, just like Ali, they looked to organize the community, and there's no doubt that from the time of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq all the way to the time of Ali, what was the ummah plagued with? Division, fitna. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, people said they were not going to pay the zakah. You see what I'm saying? Umar, he was murdered. And Umar said that as he was dying, radiallahu anhu, he was happy that he was not murdered by a Muslim. Uthman, by the time Uthman comes in, already the fitna is starting more and more. Why was one of the reasons why we can say the fitna is starting more and more? I gave some indication to this. What was happening that would lead to that? Huh? No, not madhab. You could say in general, but I mentioned something in the time period, Uthman. No, before that, like what's taking place in the background? Yes, they're expanding. They're expanding. Yes. Not only Khawarij. This is something that we need to really pay attention to. With the issue of the expansion or the issue of launching out outside of what we know, what begins to happen? Yeah. We have that. I mean, we went through those phases. I mean, literally in some communities, there was massive debates about whether we should do the khutbah in English or not in English. That was one phase here in the US. I mean, this thing went so deep, there was in some communities discussions whether the Arabs and the Desi, they can marry each other. We think that that's funny. That's not funny. It's not to bring up the faults of the Muslims. It's what? It's a challenge. Even the Desi community here can say, you can testify to this. Is the concept Desi a concept that you find in Pakistan and India and Bangladesh by itself? Or is that really hardcore American, almost not American, but Western phenomena? Western. Challenges, and the Muslims, they come up to the occasion. The same thing like Ali. They say Abu Aswad al-Du'ali was appointed by Ali to codify the grammar of the Arabic language, or the beginning stage to teach. Why? Because they began to see that the youth were losing their ability to read and speak Arabic, and they were scared that it was going to have an impact on their understanding of the Quran. So to meet to that challenge, they took this course of action. Okay, how are we going to address it? How are we going to address this? Is by an educational role. So the lesson that we want to take here today is, as all these changes are taking place, challenges are coming. As this expansion thing is taking place, serious challenges are coming to the foundations of the Muslims, right? But what you see is the Muslims rising to the occasion. The leadership is rising to the occasion. One of the most unique points, and it's really sad because it didn't, in the case of Ali, you didn't see it in the same way. Ali was a big supporter of Uthman, a big defender of Uthman. So as Uthman is making these changes, Ali is not only giving him advice, because he already sees that people are against him. You see what I'm saying? He already sees that there's threats, but he's solidifying and making sure, that not on his watch. Because Abdullah bin Sabah, he sent a group to kind of undermine Uthman, militant group. And Ali went and met them. And one of the things that what was happening in the time of Uthman is people began to alter the aqidah of the people. So Abdullah bin Sabah was saying to people, he was giving them ideas about Ali that was making like Ali divine. You see what I'm saying? So one of the things that we learn here is like, yes, if people are on the side infiltrating, it's one thing if they say to you, well, this guy, he sold your land unjustly. Maybe the Khalifa came and took your land and he expanded it so the poor can have housing, this, that. But it's one thing to argue on that point. It's another thing to come and argue on Aqidah issues and confuse the people on Aqidah. You see what I'm saying? Yes. We have that right now, people. We have that right now. After the Arab Spring, especially when Sisi took charge of Al-Azhar, because Al-Azhar has always been in that tense position with the system. But now, a dictator takes control over. So now, over one of the educational institutions, We don't realize when Sheikh al-Azhar used to speak, it was like the Khalifa. When Sheikh al-Azhar gave a fatwa for the Sunnis, we don't see, we don't understand how much there's been plotting on the Sunnis, how much there's been attacks on the Sunnis. We don't see how much, in this 100 years, how much effort was put to undermine the Sunnis completely. But when Sheikh al-Azhar used to speak, the whole of the Sunni world used to move, because he was like Sheikh al-Islam for them. So Sisi takes power after the Arab Spring. And so now all we have all over the place is attacks on the Muslim Brotherhood, attacks on the Salafis. And you say, everybody has to be Sufi and Ash'ari. This is the only correct way. I'm not here to say this Aqidah is right, this Aqidah is wrong. What I'm saying is this, that what's happening now is that the politics uses the religion and the groups to what? To clash. Right? That's the same thing that happened, in Iraq. We saw that in Pakistan. We saw that in Afghanistan. We saw that in Syria. Same thing. And in our communities, it's easy for that to come into play. See what I'm saying? So that's one of the lessons that we get, is that the enemies of Islam, what they do is they come in and they bring in fitna between us. This one practices like this madhab and that madhab. We know those madhabs exist. But how we deal with that is with knowledge, not with fighting each other. See what I'm saying? We deal with that with knowledge. And we may choose this, not choose that. Somebody's feelings may get hurt. We know, for instance, that, there's a massive debates on a regular basis with regard to how do we sight the moon? Do we use calculation? Do we use local sighting? Do we use international sighting? But that's for the community to discuss. But not for somebody from the outside to come in and make a fitna out of it. You see what I'm saying? The community decides that based on knowledge and their needs. But when the enemies of Islam, when they come in, they bring confusion in. And they use these things. So that was one of the challenges that they had to face. Ali clarified that challenge for them. Ali made sure that that type of fitna was not going to be a source of the division amongst the Muslims. So the unity of the Muslims was very definitely something that the leadership was cautious of. And we have to be careful of that right now, because we're being pushed. We're being pushed into a new type of fight with each other. It's happening. You see it. You see online is full of it. You see overseas is full of it. So much so that between the Mawlid and this issue of Aqidah, it began to take the place of the talk about Palestine. The whole internet was full of a discussion on Palestine, and then it just whoosh, it kind of disappeared. And then you see what happened. So we have to be aware of that. We have to be aware of that. The other reality is this, that we have to be aware of that as we grow, masajid grow, communities grow, as we grow, as we go into new lands, we're going to be faced with real challenges. And one of the biggest challenges that we're faced with is how to work together. How to work together. That's why, from my side, and we have to be careful how we understand some of these things, because the new Muslims get confused. I spent a lot of time on that with the issue of the Sahaba. When I first became Muslim, like, why did they divide this, that? And I couldn't get real clear answers. But one of the things that you can be compassionate with Uthman on is that in a time of fitna, you call on your family. See what I'm saying? You call on your family. And the reality is that even Sheikh Uthman Dan Fodio in West Africa, when he went to establish his political authority, he did the same thing. It's natural. It's natural on boards. It's natural on, in institutions that you call on your family. But we have to realize that how do the people take that? How do the people take that? Anybody? You understand what I'm saying or no? If I call on my family and I surround myself only by my family. It's beautiful, it's nice, but how does the community take it? Nepotism, yeah, monopoly. So, can that lead to the disintegration of the institution? Any institution? It could, on multiple levels. If the family fights or if there's a divorce even, then you have all these economic ties, you know what I'm saying? But when it's not, it's, you have maybe fights over inheritance where it flips over and it becomes a fight between the people. But that's why, for instance, the idea of nepotism is something that, is looked at as a conflict of interest. Nepotism is when you're favoring your family over the others. So we gained that lesson from them. We also gained the lesson of the importance of the Quran and us being united on the Quran. That's extremely important. You know what I'm saying? For us as Muslims to be united on the Quran. That doesn't mean we're not people of the Sunnah and so on and so forth, but we give the Quran its centrality. And we can't go into all of the details, but one of the things that keeps coming up is, and we mentioned this last time, is the issue of shura. You see that. That's one of the qualifying characteristics of us as Sunnis. Is the reality of shura. Is the reality of shura. And we have to train ourselves in that. And I'll tell you, and I'll end on this point, and it has to start in the household between husband and wife, whether we like it or not. I see too many families, too much tension on that level, on that front. And too many communities, the same thing. But we also have to be what? Be respectful of what? That everything is not just a democracy and everybody's opinion. Sometimes we have to let things go for what? For the well-being of the institution, the well-being of the family, as long as it's not something that's harmful. See what I'm saying? That's where the ego comes in. Well, it has to be my opinion. You didn't take my opinion. You see what I'm saying? That, going with that over and over again and fighting on that is dangerous for us. Sometimes we have to let leadership lead, but leadership has to be open to what? To shorter, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we always have to take everybody's opinion on everything. That may not sound correct to some people. But why do I say that? Because now that's how it is. Everybody wants an opinion. But then when it comes to work, or when it comes to sacrifice, or when it comes to the struggle, they're not there. You see what I mean? So that becomes a big issue. And our masajid have turned into political, places of political conflict. Why? Because of this issue. My vote, my person, I want to be on the board. Then you don't see the person anywhere. You don't see the person anywhere. And if we think that the Sahaba, they gave money to control, you see what I'm saying? So I'm gonna donate, or I'm gonna give in this point. So I'm a member. That's not the approach. They were not buying. They were giving to sacrifice. They say that Uthman gave 20,000 dirham. You know what 20,000 dirham is? To buy the well, to serve the Muslims. So we have to have that mindset, people. We're building. Whether we realize it or not, we're building, because the more that we establish our communities, we're leaving something for the future. We're not going to be here. We're establishing Islam here. And it comes with a lot of challenges. And the worst that we can do is abandon the masjid because of our conflicts. That's what happens. Because once we abandon the masjid, where do we go? There's nowhere else to go. That doesn't mean that, we just leave everything as it is if it's bad, but we have to learn how to deal with the situation as it is, and contribute. Be patient and contribute. Be patient and contribute. It's difficult. And then if it gets to a point where we can no longer work in these spaces, then we create another space. But not just from what? Because it's not the way I want, or just desire. And that's the same thing in the household. You see what I'm saying? When people don't get what they want, what do they aim for? Divorce. We have the same mentality on mostly every front. Anybody have any questions or any comments before we close out? The Quran was memorized and the Quran was written down. But it was written down, it was not written down in one. No, it was not written down like in one like in a one collection. You had smaller collections, right? Everyone had their collections. No, they were known. The only thing that is a point of debate is whether the order of the sword, whether that came from the Sahaba or whether that came from the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba, and then the question comes up on the issue of, the meaning tawqifi and ijtihadi? So basically the idea tawqifi, it means that it was revealed like that from Allah. Ijtihadi means that they put some effort into it and they researched it and they thought about it according to, principles. So majority of the surah of the Quran, they were guided by revelation. And we have proof of that. When you look in Bukhari and so on and so forth, you see that the Prophet ﷺ talks about the order. I'm of the opinion that all of it is from Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala. But it wouldn't be fair for me to say that and not say that some of the scholars say that the organization of the surah of the Quran, the order that we find them with in the Mus'haf, that it came from the Prophet and the Sahaba. Some of them believe that. That's a topic in and of itself. But there were about 5 original copies of the Quran. Unfortunately, we lost one of them in the war in Iraq. In the war in Iraq, they came and they took a lot of stuff. It was not just war. They took gold, they took books, they took that. But in Egypt, there's one copy. In Turkey, there's one copy. I believe in Saudi Arabia. The other 2, I'm not sure. But you can see it online even. It's amazing. I'm telling you, it's amazing. It's amazing to be able to say that we believe in revelation and it was revealed from Allah wa Ta'ala, and it still is the same 1400 years later. And not only that, that if we learn enough Arabic, we can access some of it. That's even more amazing, as it is. Because I'm going to tell you, in order to try it, there's no original copy of the Bible. It's translation. It was first translated into Greek, then translated into Latin. The Jewish community, they lost their ability to speak Hebrew. And what you see now in Palestine is they revived it from the Arabic. But they lost their ability to speak Hebrew. And they were speaking Greek and writing Greek. That's why the Bible was in Greek. And that's a serious lesson to us as Muslims when it comes to the issue of the Quran. The issue of the Arabic language has nothing to do with nationalism. Because the Prophet ﷺ, he came into Mecca and was using the Arabic language, and the Quran itself, as it was being revealed, was changing the meanings of the Arabic language. It was the Quranic meanings for certain terms in the Arabic language are not the same that how they were used by the Arabs. Like the term du'a, the term salah, all of that Islam, those types of terms, they were known in the language, but the meanings that were giving to them were special meanings to show that Islam came and changed the language of the Arabs. Why? Because that becomes a dividing point. Some people don't want to learn the Arabic language because of that. But the point of that, to mention this, is that the lack of connectivity with the language, it caused that nation before us to lose their contact with their book. So we are very blessed ummah. Not only from the angle of the Quran, but also from the angle of what? The life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When I was a Christian, I was a practicing Christian, I used to want to know who Jesus was. And there's no, alayhi salatu wasalam, there's no authentic book that can tell you who Jesus is. Imagination. It's nice imagination, but it's not accurate. And the Muslim knows the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he was born, who were his parents, how he lived, how he was understood in the society. And even if you look at the historical records, you know how they look at the historical records and they look at from the outside. When you look at the historical records of how people talked about the Prophet ﷺ, whether it was other communities, the Christian empire or the Persians or whoever it was from other nations, the way they talk about the Prophet ﷺ, it gives us accuracy of who he was. So this ummah in that regard, there's no other ummah like it on the face of the earth. So we ask Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala to unite our hearts and to allow us to appreciate the ni'mah of Islam. Any sisters, do you want to say any comments? Wa alaikum salam.